Assalamu alaikum students. The essay that we're going to be doing today is on a rather interesting topic. I don't know how many of you have had the occasion to look at the chimney of a house and see what happens inside the chimney. Now I know we are burning gas and we're using electricity in some cases to light our stoves, but not so very long ago we were using coal to burn, coal or wood. Some of you might be familiar with the fact that in the villages and the rural areas we still burn wood or some form of fuel which gives off smoke. Now with fuel that gives off smoke, you need an exhaust. So if you have not seen a chimney, you will have seen an exhaust. I'm not talking about the exhaust fan. That is outside the building. What you have inside the kitchen or inside the cooking place is a kind of exhaust, a kind of pipe that is made which takes not only the smoke but which also sucks in the heat, and at the end of the pipe that is outside the wall, you have an exhaust fan which serves to suck all the heat and the gas and the fumes out of the house. Now when coal is burnt or when wood is burnt, there's a lot of smoke. You don't see smoke when gas is being burnt, but what you do see is that even when you're burning gas and you don't have an exhaust fan on, the temperature of the kitchen rises to a degree that it becomes unbearable. And so in that case you need an exhaust fan to suck all the heat out. So when coal or wood is being burnt, you need to have an outlet for the smoke. And the essay that Lamb has written in Praise of Chimney Sweeps is the one that is focused on the role of these little boys who were called chimney sweeps. Lamb has written a lot of essays, and we've done a few which have dealt with different aspects of life. We've done the one that is titled That You Love Me and You Must Love My Dog. Then we have done the one which is purely in the world of imagination, that is Dream Children. And we did poor relations, where Lamb discussed how uncomfortable it makes a person feel when you are a poor relation and you are dependent on the charity, so to speak, of your richer relations. The present essay deals specifically with chimney sweeps, and Lamb tells you at the very outset that he's talking about the young boys. Now there were two categories of chimney sweeps. The first category is that of very young boys, and the other is that of slightly older men. And as we begin the essay and we go on with Lamb's description of chimney sweeps and his reasons for praising chimney sweeps, you will realize why it is that Lamb thinks that these children or these young men are doing such a wonderful job. So without further ado, let us go on with the text so that we can see what exactly it is that Lamb is concerned with in this essay. I like to meet a sweep, understand me, not a grown sweeper, old chimney sweepers are by no means attractive. Oh, well, you know, old people in any case are not attractive. It is always the young who are beautiful and who are energetic and enthusiastic and keen, like all of you, who are to be praised. So he says, old chimney sweepers are by no means attractive, but one of those tender novices, blooming through their first negritude, the maternal washings not quite effaced from the cheek, such as come forth with the dawn, or somewhat earlier, with the little professional notes sounding like the peep-peep of a young sparrow, or liker to the matin lark, should I pronounce them, in their aerial ascents, not seldom anticipating the sunrise. So you see, Lamb is concerned with the young boys. He's not concerned with the older chimney sweeps. He's concerned with the young boys, as he says, the novices, those who have still not lost the bloom of their youth. He refers to their first negritude, that is, the first few times when they are coated with coal dust. Now, in order to understand this, you need to think of what the inside of a chimney is like, because it's the smoke that is being emitted from the chimney, and the chimney works as an exhaust pipe. Coal smoke is something that leaves a residue on the surface that it touches. So when it is coming out of the chimney, the smoke, because it touches the sides of the chimney, it leaves a residue in the form of black soot. Yes, I know. Most of you have seen that, but I'm giving this detail for those of you who may not have had the opportunity to see coal or to see the soot, the residue that is left inside the chimney walls, and which has a tendency to stick onto anything that touches it. So when these chimney boys descend from the chimney, their purpose is to clean the chimney sweeps. So they clean the inside of the chimney, because coal, since it leaves a residue on the surface that it touches, that residue becomes thick, and if it is not cleaned on a regular basis, then it will form cakes and fall on the fire. And since you're talking about an open fire and you're cooking on the open fire, whatever you're cooking is going to have coal dust falling on it. Okay, so it needs to be cleaned on a regular basis, which is one reason why we did away with coal as fuel. We still have great deposits of coal, but we're using them mainly in the rural areas and in the manufacture of electricity. So coming back to chimney sweeps, these young boys would be let into the chimney from the rooftop, and as they went down the chimney, they would clean the inside of the chimney. Yes, it's a very difficult task, and you need to be not only very flexible and have the ability to do what is called dirty work, but you must also have a lot of courage. You know, because when you descend inside the chimney, it's dark. It's not only dark, but you are surrounded by walls. And it's quite claustrophobic just thinking about being in a place where you're surrounded on all sides by walls. It's not like being in a room where you have, you know, it's spacious. A chimney would be about this wide. And when I say that a chimney is this wide, obviously it's going to take a very young and a very slim boy to descend into the chimney and work his way down. So what they did was they would descend into the chimney, and that's one reason why they had very young boys doing it, and obviously very poor boys. You know, these were not people who had the option of another job. These are young boys who had to earn a living and who didn't have education or social standing which would allow them to get a better job. So these young boys, Lamb is full of praise for, and he tells us that I like to meet these chimney sweeps because I think they're doing a wonderful job. Now, Lamb, remember, is writing in the 18th century. 18th century is industrial England. And in industrial England, there was a lot of coal being burnt. England, you know, has big deposits of coal. That is why coal used to be the main form of obtaining heat. England is a very cold country, and winters are killing if you don't have heating. Now, of course, you have electric heating inside apartment buildings, inside houses, office buildings, etc. But before that, they were burning coal. So 18th century, the time that Lamb is writing in, England was burning coal not only for heating purposes, but also for cooking purposes. Okay? So Lamb says, I like to meet a sweep, not a grown sweeper, but one of those tender novices, young boys who have just started working as chimney sweeps. And he says they come forth with the dawn, if not earlier. So the first things that you see in the street are these chimney sweeps. When the rest of the world is sleeping, these chimney sweeps, these young boys are awake, and they are already on their way to work to clean the chimneys before people wake up and start doing their cooking or start heating the house. Because in the 18th century, you know, you had these huge fireplaces where you would have a big fire, and it would serve not only to heat the whole room, but you would also do your cooking there. You'd put a kettle there, boil water for tea, you'd put meat there that would be roasted. And I know I'm making some of you feel hungry with this mention of meat being slowly roasted, but that is very much the kind of scene that I want you to imagine when you think of a chimney sweep coming early in the morning at the time of dawn to clean these chimneys. And so he says when they come for their duty, there's a sound that they make, and it's because they're very young boys, and their voices have not become heavy as boys' voices tend to become once they reach puberty. So they have this very tiny sound that they make, which is like the sound of a sparrow. So it's a very musical sound, and Lamb is rather fond of this sound. I have a kindly yearning towards these dim specks, poor blots, innocent blacknesses. See the beautiful words that Lamb uses to describe these young boys. He calls them dim specks because, you know, they are all black. They're not born black, but black is the trademark of their profession. He calls them poor blots. They're poor. Yes, they are poor, and that is why they do this work. If they had a little money, maybe they would look for a cleaner job, not one in which you're bound to come back home needing a wash, needing a bath. So innocent blacknesses, because they're very, very young boys. I reverence these young Africans of our own growth. So he calls them young Africans not because they are Africans, but because their color has become black. They're born very fair. They're born with a fair complexion and light hair perhaps, but because of their work, they become like Africans. So Lamb calls them these young Africans of our own growth. These are Africans who have been born not in Africa, but they have been born and raised in England, but their profession, their work has ensured that their color changes from pink and white to black. So these almost clergy imps who sport their cloth without assumption, and from their little pulpits in the nipping air of a December morning preach a lesson of patience to mankind. Beautiful words Lamb has used, because he's trying to describe the work of these young chimney sweeps. So he says that these are almost clergy imps. There is so much dedication, so much enthusiasm that these young boys put into their work that it is almost as if they were priests. So once Lamb brings in this analogy of the priest, he carries it one step further, and he calls it sporting their cloth without assumption. The cloth refers to the dress of a clergyman, the dress of a priest. So these chimney sweeps look as if they're wearing a uniform. Now, you know, priests, clergymen in the Christian church have a kind of uniform way of dressing, and that garb, that dress is particular of their profession. I'm not talking about contemporary Christian priests. They go around wearing jeans, they'll wear suits. We're talking about the 18th century, when they were still wearing those long dresses which reached to the ankles, and that was the mark of a clergyman. So when Lamb brings in this analogy of a priest or a clergyman, he discusses this in great detail. He calls these little chimney sweeps clergy imps, and then he talks about their uniform because they're wearing black clothes. And then he says that from their little pulpits, they preach a lesson of patience to mankind. And this lesson of patience is a very important lesson. They're very, very patient. Remember, they're coming in the morning, before dawn has broken. They're coming in the month of December, which is very, very cold. There's snow falling all over the place, and here are these little boys who are already at work, and they just climbed onto the rooftop, and they descend inside the chimney. So Lamb is full of praise, full of appreciation for them, because he says, above everything else, these young boys teach us a lesson of patience. So he compares them to clergymen, and he says that as a clergyman standing inside the church preaches from the pulpit, so do these young boys standing on top of the chimneys preach a lesson of patience to mankind. When a child, what a mysterious pleasure it was to witness their operation. To see a chit no bigger than oneself enter, one knew not by what process, into what seemed the forces of Ernie, to pursue him imagination as he went sounding on through so many dark, stifling caverns, horrid shades, to shudder with the idea that now surely he must be lost forever, to revive at hearing his feeble shout of discovered daylight. So Lamb goes back into his own past and thinks of what he felt as when he saw a young boy about the same age, about the same size as Elia, as Charles Lamb, descending into the darkness of the chimney. Claustrophobic. I would not be able to do it. Most of you would not be able to do it. To descend into the chimney and to clean it as you go, and not to know what daylight is like until you go down and down and you reach the place where at other times the fire would be burning. So it's fascinating to watch these young children enter the chimney, and as they go down the chimney, they knock at the side walls of the chimney, because that's how they dislodge pieces of soot that have collected on the sides of the walls, and that must be cleaned. So they keep on hitting against the chimney walls, and there's a particular music in the sound that is produced until there is a shout that tells everyone that the chimney sweep has descended from the chimney and is now inside the house. So for Lamb and others like him, for Elia, at an age when he was going to school and seeing these young boys coming down the chimneys was a fascinating experience. And he says that, you know, when I finally heard that shout which the chimney sweeps give on descending into the fireplace, was a very heartening sound. It was a big relief, because when he saw these young boys going inside the chimney, he would feel that this boy is going to get lost in the chimney, not realizing that this is something that he is doing every day of his life. And so he's not going to get lost, but he is going to get dirtier than ever. So fascinated with the idea of a very young boy working at a time when Lamb or Elia is just an observer. It does not have to do that for a living. So seeing somebody do that for a living is fascinating, and Lamb is full of praise for these young chimney sweeps. and then running out of doors to come just in time to see the sable phenomenon emerge in safety, the brandished weapon of his art victorious like some flag waved over a conquered citadel. Look at the beautiful images that Lamb brings in. First he compares this young boy to a priest, and then he compares him to a conquering hero and says that when this young boy emerged from the chimney and came down the fireplace and came into the house, for young boys it was a very interesting spectacle, because the young boys had thought that these young chimney sweeps who are going inside the chimneys are sure to get lost. So to see them emerging and waving, you know, that weapon or that tool that they use to dislodge those blocks of soot, that in itself was a very good feeling, because it was with relief that they watched these young boys emerging from the chimney. I seem to remember having been told that a bad sweep was once left in a stack with his brush to indicate which way the wind blew. It was an awful spectacle, certainly not much unlike the old stage direction in Macbeth, where the quote-unquote apparition of a child crowned with a tree in his hand rises, unquote. So Lamb brings in further examples. You see, Lamb was a very well-read person, and whatever he read, whatever knowledge he gathered with his reading, he intersperses his lines with examples from whatever it is that he has read. In the previous essays, for example, you saw that he brought in references to Latin. He brought in references from mythology, and he continues to do that. So this time he brings in an example from Shakespeare, and he says that a bad sweep, one who was not doing his job properly, was once punished by being left inside the chimney stack, and he was told to hold the brush in his hand and stay inside the chimney stack to act as a kind of a wind vane to see which way the wind blew. So it wasn't that his employers wanted to see which way the wind blew so much as they wanted to punish him. So this is almost like the scene of that ghost in Macbeth, and those of you who've read Shakespeare's play Macbeth will know that that is one play in which you have frequent appearances of ghosts, different people who have been killed, different people who are dead, come back on the stage in the form of ghosts. So this apparition of a young child with a tree in his hand, obviously it cannot be a tree, so that brush of the chimney sweep is compared to a tree. And Lamb says that the imaginary picture of a young chimney sweep with a brush in his hand sticking out of the chimney stack is almost like the ghost that you see in the play Macbeth. So Lamb, you know, is full of incidents, full of references from the classics, from mythology, from everything that he has read. Reader, and now Lamb comes to what he wants us to do, or what he wanted the readers of the 18th century to do. So he, reader, if thou meetest one of these small gentry in thy early rambles, it is good to give him a penny. And that's just a tip. A penny doesn't take anything from a gentleman, but it can mean a lot for the chimney sweep, because they come from the very poorest class in society. It is better to give him 2 pence. So if you have a penny, give him a penny, but it would be a better act if you were to give him 2 pennies. If it be starving weather, and you know winters can be very severe in England, and they were even more severe when you didn't have gas and electricity to heat your houses. So if it be starving weather, and to the proper troubles of his hard occupation, a pair of kibbed heels, no unusual accompaniment, be superadded, the demand on thy humanity will surely rise to a tester. So if you have a pair of shoes, and that is spare, give it to a chimney sweep, because the chimney sweep, in the majority of cases, will not possess a pair of shoes. So if you have some spare change, give him that change. If you have a spare pair of shoes, you will be doing a great favor to mankind if you give a poor boy a pair of shoes. So Lamb is aware of the fact that these chimney sweeps were the very poorest in society, and so anything that anyone can give, it should be given, and more than that. It's not something that you're giving out of charity. It's something that you're giving out of compassion, because these are also young boys who deserve a better life, and who do not have a better life for the sole reason that they are born poor and they are raised uneducated. So they cannot hope to get a better job than this. And it was a very, very low paying job, which was why it was the very poorest in society who were found to be doing this. So whatever you can give them help with, he said, do it. And he's addressing here gentlemen who might be coming home late from parties, to imagine that the time when they are coming home, somebody is already going to work, is a rather depressing idea. So in that situation, Ilya advises to give some money to these chimney sweeps. There is a composition, the groundwork of which I have understood to be the sweet wood yclept sassafras. This wood boiled down to a kind of tea, and now Lamb is going off into a totally different area. So you see, he's bringing in examples from many different fields and many different aspects of life. So now he comes to sassafras tea, and he says that there is a kind of wood that is boiled, and a kind of tea is made out of it, and tempered with an infusion of milk and sugar. And you know, this concept of the tea with milk and sugar is something that is peculiarly English. The rest of the world, you mention tea and they'll give you black tea. They will not put milk in it. They might put sugar in it, but this tea with milk is something that is typically British. So this wood is boiled down to a kind of tea, and because it's rather strong, milk is added to it to make it milder, and sugar is added to it to improve the flavor. And this is something that he says the chimney sweeps are very partial to. You will not find many other people drinking this kind of tea, but it appears that sassafras tea does something to a chimney sweep's throat, so that all the soot that he inhales is sort of cleared up by drinking sassafras tea. So he says that when you see chimney sweeps, you'll see that invariably they will be drinking sassafras tea. They will not drink other kinds of tea. So he says that there is this place that is run by Mr. Reed, and this place serves sassafras tea. And Ilya claims that it's the only place in London that serves sassafras tea. And he further defines the sassafras tea in these words, and these are quote unquote, wholesome and pleasant beverage on the south side of Fleet Street. Now he's locating this place that Mr. Reed runs, as thou approachest Bridge Street. So he imagines a Londoner of the 18th century to whom he's giving directions. So he's giving very complete directions. I have never yet adventured to dip my own particular lip in a basin of the commended ingredient, a cautious premonition of the olfactories constantly whispering to me that my stomach must infallibly, with all due courtesy, decline it. So Lamb doesn't approach the subject directly. He's not like Francis Bacon, who uses very few words and who conveys a wealth of meaning. Lamb will go round and round a topic, and he'll use 100 words to describe what perhaps Francis Bacon would use one sentence for. So there is this difference in his style. So he says that if you go to this place that is run by Mr. Reed, you will see that he serves sassafras tea. And then he goes one step further, and he says that that tea is something that he has not had the occasion to taste, because he always feels that if he were to do it, he wouldn't like it. His stomach wouldn't be able to digest it, as he says. Yet I have seen palates, otherwise not uninstructed in dialectical elegances, sap it up with avidity. So he says, I'm one of the very few people who cannot take sassafras tea, but I know a lot of people who do it and who enjoy it immensely. So that is the fact that Ilya cannot digest sassafras tea, or Ilya doesn't like sassafras tea, should not be considered a benchmark for all people. Some like it, others don't, and Lamb, writing under the pseudonym of Ilya, says that he doesn't like it, but that is not to say that other people don't like it, and he personally knows a lot of people who are very fond of sassafras tea. I know not by what particular conformation of the organ it happens, but I have always found that this composition is surprisingly gratifying to the palate of a young chimney sweeper. Whether the oily particles do attenuate and soften the fuliginous concretions which are sometimes found in dissections to adhere to the roof of the mouth in these unfledged practitioners, or whether nature, sensible that she had mingled too much of bitter wood in the lot of these raw victims, caused to grow out of the earth her sassafras for a sweet lenitive, but so it is, that no possible taste or odor to the senses of a young chimney sweeper can convey a delicate excitement comparable to this mixture. So he says that although I cannot bear it, I know a lot of people who drink it and who like it, and it's something that is particularly pleasant and particularly appreciated by chimney sweeps. And then he gives the reason as being that of cleaning the insides, because he says the chimney sweeps are full of soot particles inside their throat, and sassafras tea helps to clear the throat. Being penniless, they will yet hang their black heads over the ascending steam to to gratify one sense if possible, seemingly no less pleased than those domestic animals, cats, when they purr over a newfound sprig of valerian. So for a chimney sweeper, sassafras tea has the same attraction that valerian has for cats. There's something more in these sympathies than philosophy can inculcate. Now, albeit Mr. Reed boasteth, not without reason, that his is the only Salopian house, yet be it known to thee, reader, that he hath a race of industrious imitators who from stalls and under open sky dispense the same savoury mess to humbler customers at that dead time of the dawn, when the rake reeling home from his midnight cups, and the hard-handed artisan leaving his bed to resume the premature labours of the day, jostle not unfrequently to the manifest disconcerting of the former for the honours of the pavement. Now, to go back a bit, the time at which these chimney sweeps come out to do their work, he says, is also the time when perhaps one of the members of the aristocracy or the gentry or the nobility is going home after having attended a late night party. So here you have these people who have a lot of money and who are attending parties that go on for so long at night that they come home towards dawn, and that is the time when these chimney sweeps are going out to work. So they meet each other, or they will be walking on the same pavement, one going home, the other going to work. So he says that this is the time at which they meet. There's the rake going home to sleep, there's the chimney sweep leaving home to go to work. So this is Saloop, the precocious herb-woman's darling, the delight of the early gardener, who transports his smoking cabbages by break of day from Hammersmith to Covent Garden's famed piazzas, the delight, and oh, I fear, to often the envy of the unpennied sweep. So there's this man going home. There's another man who is bringing vegetables on a cart to sell into the market, and there's this chimney sweep who's also going to work. So you have different classes of people who are traveling at the same time, who are out of the house at the same time, but for different purposes, for completely different purposes. Him shouldst thou haply encounter, with his dim visage pendant over the grateful steam, regale him with a sumptuous basin. It will cost thee but 3 hippones. So he says, if you meet a person like the chimney sweep, who has no money at all, give him some money so that he can at least have tea. If he is unable to have food, at least give him tea, which will cleanse the inside of his body that otherwise would be clogged with soot dust, and which would mean that he would have trouble breathing. And it will not take anything from you. From you, it would be a very small amount. But for the chimney sweep, it will be a big amount. It will not only get him a cup of sassafras tea, it will also allow him to buy a slice of bread and butter. So 3 halfpennies is all that is required. It will not be a fortune for the rich man, but it will definitely be fortunate if the chimney sweep gets this money. So may thy culinary fires eased are the overcharged secretions from thy worst placed hospitalities, curl up a lighter volume to the welkin. So may the descending soot never taint thy costly, well-ingredients soups, nor the odious cry, quick-reaching from street to street, of the fired chimney invite the rattling engines from 10 adjacent parishes to disturb for a casual scintillation thy peace and pocket. Now, a brilliant idea that Lamb gives here is the reason why he wants a rich man to give a little money to the chimney sweep. And the reason, let me give you the reason here. He says, if this chimney sweep does not have the sassafras tea, you will be the loser. You, the man with the money, will be the loser. Because if your chimney is not cleaned, it's going to spoil your food. Soot is going to fall into your food, whether it is a soup or whether it is something else that is being made. If your chimney is not cleaned, your food is going to be dirtied. If your chimney is not cleaned, your chimney, the inside of the chimney, will catch fire. When that coal dust becomes too much, it clogs your chimney, then either your chimney will catch fire and you will have to pay for the fire engines that come from all over the place. And you know, we're talking about the time when even fire engines were horse-drawn carriages, so it would take a long time, which would mean a lot of property would be damaged by the time the fire engine got to the house. So he says it is absolutely essential that you feed the chimney sweeps if you see them, because the chimney sweeps are essential to the way of life of the aristocracy. I am by nature extremely susceptible of street affronts, the jeers and taunts of the populace, the low-bred triumph they display over the casual trip or splash stocking of a gentleman. Yet can I endure the jocularity of a young sweep with something more than forgiveness. In the last winter but one, pacing along Cheapside with my accustomed precipitation when I walk westward, a treacherous slide brought me upon my back in an instant. I scrambled up with pain and shame enough, yet outwardly trying to face it down as if nothing had happened, when the roguish grin of one of these young wits encountered me. Okay, so Lamb sort of goes off at a tangent, and he says that I am one of those who do not appreciate when people laugh at someone else's misfortune. You know, somebody falls, trips and falls, and everybody bursts out laughing. He says, I'm not the one to do that, but the only time I make an exception is when the chimney sweeps laugh at something. And then he gives a personal example, and he says that some time back I was walking and somehow or the other I stepped onto something which led to my falling flat on my back. And he says the first reaction that you have when you trip and fall, or when you slip and fall, is that you look around you and your first thought is, has anybody seen me fall? Because the embarrassment is more than the physical hurt. So he says, I looked around me, and what did I see? I saw a young chimney sweep grinning at me. There he stood, pointing me out with his dusky finger to the mob and to a poor woman in particular, till the tears for the exquisiteness of the fun worked themselves out at the corners of his poor red eyes, red from many a previous weeping, and soot-inflamed, yet twinkling through all with such a joy snatched out of desolation, that Hogarth, in the march to Finley, grinning at the piemen, there he stood, as he stands in the picture, immovable as if the jest was to last forever, with such a maximum of glee and minimum of mischief in his mirth, for the grin of a genuine sweep had absolutely no malice in it, that I could have been content, if the honour of a gentleman might endure it, to have remained his butt and his mockery till midnight. A long sentence, but one in which Lamb is trying to explain that when he slipped and fell, and he looked around to see if anybody was watching, what he did see was this young chimney sweep who was laughing and pointing at Lamb or Ilya, and he was laughing so much that, you know, tears came out of his eyes. But he said that I did not resent his laughter. I did not get angry with him, for the simple reason that this young boy has very few occasions at which he can laugh. This young boy does not get the occasion to laugh frequently. So if he's laughing at me, let him laugh. As he says, if I had my way, I would have stayed there, so that this young boy would have the opportunity to laugh at something. This boy who perhaps has been weeping because he has no food, because he has no money, if he has an occasion for laughter, I am willing to be the butt of his laughter. I don't mind, because this young boy will have very few moments in his life when he will be able to laugh. I am by theory obdurate to the seductiveness of what are called a fine set of teeth. And so, again he shifts his focus. Every pair of rosy lips is a casket, presumably holding such jewels, but methinks they should take leave to air them as frugally as possible. The fine lady or fine gentlemen who show me their teeth show me bones. Yet must I confess that from the mouth of a true sweep, a display of those white and shining ossifications strikes me as an agreeable anomaly in manners and an allowable piece of foppery. Now there's a lot that Lamb is saying here. He's still talking about the chimney sweep. He's still talking about the face of the chimney sweep. But now he shifts his focus to the teeth. The chimney sweep, because he's black, has shining teeth. The contrast of the black and the white is so wonderful that he says that's the only time when I like seeing teeth. Lamb was a serious person. Ilya is a serious person. And Ilya says that normally I do not like to see people laughing. And he's talking mainly about ladies and gentlemen. And the reason he gives is that he considers teeth to be bones. And he says, you don't need to show me your bones. If I look at a man or a woman laughing, what I see is bones in a casket, in a container, dead bones. But the only time he says that I like seeing teeth or I like seeing these bones is when I see a chimney sweep laughing. So a lot of humanitarian feeling. A sable cloud turns forth her silver lining on the night. Beautiful image. A sable cloud, a dark cloud. It's night. There are clouds on the horizon. And a cloud turns to show the silver lining. For the chimney sweeps, this moment of laughter with Ilya falling flat on his back is the silver lining. Throughout the day and the night, the chimney sweep will not have an occasion to feel happy because he's poor, because he does dirty work, because he does not have enough to eat. So if he has this moment of laughter, it's like that silver lining, which is momentary. It's very, very short-lived. And so Ilya does not want to deny him that. It is like some remnant of gentry, not quite extinct, a badge of better days, a hint of nobility, and doubtless, under the obscuring darkness and double night of their forlorn disguisement, oftentimes lurketh good blood and gentle conditions derived from lost ancestry and a lapsed pedigree. And again Lamb shifts his focus, and he says that the aristocracy is a class by itself, and so are the chimney sweeps. The nobility, the aristocracy at the very top rung of society. The chimney sweeps at the very bottom. But he says that when you look at their faces and you see a hint of laughter, the feeling that you get is that they were not always at the very bottom rung of society. There is a hint of gentry, as he calls it, in this laughter. And Ilya's idea is that perhaps this is an indicator, a sign of a lapsed pedigree. Perhaps the family in which the chimney sweep has been born was not always poor. Perhaps they have fallen to bad times, hard times, and that is why they are forced to go to work as chimney sweeps, the kind of work that pays the least amount of money and involves very, very hard work. So he is able to sort of connect the two classes by saying that you cannot be sure that these chimney sweeps come from a family which has always been poor, which has always been at the bottom rung of society. The very fact that you see this hint of laughter, the very fact that they are hardworking, the fact that they are up at dawn going to work, shows that there is something in these children. There's something that should have been acknowledged, but that is not being acknowledged. And this, he says, might be some lost ancestry, some lapsed pedigree. Something has gone wrong somewhere, which has resulted in this chimney sweep, or this family of chimney sweeps, being brought to the very bottom rung of society. The premature apprenticements of these tender victims give but too much encouragement, I fear, to clandestine and almost infantile abductions. The seeds of civility and true courtesy, so often discernible in these young grafts, plainly hint at some forced adoptions. Many noble Rachels mourning for their children countenance the fact that tales of fairy spiriting may shadow a lamentable verity, and the recovery of the young Montague be but a solitary instance of good fortune out of many irreparable and hopeless defiliations. Now, here's the thing. Lamb here is giving you an idea that takes that takes a bit of getting used to. He's giving the idea that these young boys do not come from poor families. The idea that Ilya is giving here is that these young boys are so polite when you talk with them, they're so well behaved, that it has made Ilya think that perhaps there was a time when they belonged to a better class of society, and that makes his imagination work, and it leads him to think that perhaps these boys have been kidnapped from families as babies, as infants, and have been forced in a family to work for their living. And that gives you food for thought, because what Ilya is trying to emphasize here is the fact that there were a lot of infants, a lot of babies who were stolen either at birth or soon after birth, and they were stolen and taken to places where from a very small age they had to work for their living. So what Ilya is trying to show here is the fact that they were not born in these poor families, but they have been abducted from very good families, perhaps from noble families, and they have been brought up in a household where they are forced to work. So the idea that that they were not born poor, that they belonged to rich class, but that they were kidnapped and forced to work for a living. And he brings in a reference from the Old Testament. He brings in a reference from Shakespeare, and he says many mothers still cry over their lost children. And the fact that these mothers are still hopeful of meeting their children one day is evidence that those children, those infants who were stolen or who were kidnapped not from the point of view of killing them, but from the point of making them work, of making them join the labor force, become an earning hand. So a kind of gang which goes around kidnapping little babies so that they can be brought up to work as chimney sweeps. So a rather unique idea that Ilya is presenting here. And he says that they might not be born poor, they might be from the nobility, and he bases this argument on the politeness or on the behavior, on the manners of some of these young sweeps. Now this is an essay that we're going to split into two classes. I'm going to continue in the next lecture also with the same essay. But before I wind up, let me quickly go through some of the things that Lamb has discussed today in this essay that is titled The Praise of Chimney Sweepers. So he starts off by clarifying one point at the very beginning, and that is that this essay is going to focus on the young chimney sweep. The older chimney sweepers do not fall in the purview of Elia's discussion. Now you notice that I use Lamb and Elia interchangeably, and the reason is that Lamb has taken on the guise, the pen name of Elia for these essays, and the collections are titled Essays of Elias and Last Essays of Elia. So he takes on the guise of Elia, and he describes what these young chimney sweeps look like, how in the very early morning, how towards dawn they come out of their houses and they start their work. They descend into these chimneys, and as they go down the chimney, they strike at the sides of the chimney. They use their brush and they sweep the inside of the chimneys. And according to Elia, this is essential, because if these chimney sweeps did not do their job, then two things would happen. Either those chimneys would clog and the soot would fall into the food that was being cooked, or the chimneys, because that layer of soot becomes so thick, it's like coal, these would catch fire, because the smoke would not be able to go out of the chimney. So the house would fill with smoke, the building would fill with smoke, or the chimney itself would catch fire. So it is essential that the work of these chimney sweeps be recognized. And he says some of these chimney sweeps, they are so polite and so well behaved that that he has the feeling that perhaps they were not born poor, and that they were born in a noble family, but that they were abducted or they were kidnapped as babies to be brought up in a family that uses children to do the work, to do the dirtiest work. And he says, when I look at some of these young boys and I see how polite and how well behaved they are, it makes me think that these are boys which might be poor right now, but who probably were not as poor when they were born. And that is where I'm going to end this lesson. We're going to start the next lesson from the same point. Thank you very much for your patience. Allah Hafiz.